when you break it down, there's really nothing other than the two sides of the coin, supply side and demand side. So whatever political shenanigans you dress it in, whatever sectors you target, whatever industries you target, or whatever political games you play to gain favor from one group or against the other, it's really just you're either doing demand side economics, supply side economics, or preferably both if you don't want to destroy a sector or an industry. What I'm seeing is that the current administration and the current Fed is only focusing on the demand side economics. So let me give you, I guess, a clear example. Let's take a good such as housing, right? We talk about that a lot on the show or podcast or whatever. So let's take a good such as housing. There's two ways how you can control house prices with interest rates or providing more or less housing. So let's take demand side economics of the housing market. If you crush demand for houses, clearly there will be more houses on the market. Thus, the price will come down. So decreasing or increasing demand side will affect the price of houses, right? Well, how do you decrease or increase house demand? Based on interest rates, how easy or hard it is to get a loan. That way, or how much money the people have, right? That way, the demand can be crushed or can be increased, and thus that affects house prices. The other way from the supply side would be making it easier or harder for builders to build houses. The easier it is for builders to build houses, may that be the elimination of red tape, new laws coming on, or anything that would make incentivize builders to push a bunch of houses, right, especially starter homes, out on the market. That would also push the balance, because now you would have a lot of houses available on the market. It could also push the house prices down. So ideally you want to control both sides, but if you're focused on only one, there's gonna be I guess you could say a correction at some point. So if you focus too much on demand side, let's say if you make houses unaffordable via the interest rates, what's going to happen is that people will stop buying houses, right? And right now the Fed is focusing a lot on the jobs market, because good news is bad news is good news, because the better, quote unquote, and double quotes here if you want, but the better the job market looks like, right, from their perspective, that means that the pain is not great enough, and that means that they cannot push down house prices because people still have money. So eventually what they need to do is, and what they're focusing to do, is to crush the jobs market. If people have no income or income stream, that way clearly the house prices will have to come down, because people will have to sell their houses. So the problem here is that what was the goal? What were you trying to fix? Was the goal to push house prices down, or was the goal to actually have a working economy without the high inflation? Because if the goal was to push the house prices down, congratulations, you did it, but you also crushed the middle class. And that's what's happening. And I think you can decide for yourself if this is a planned or kind of a unplanned way of crushing the middle class. But that's what's going to happen if you focus only and solely on demand side economics. So the correction would be, of course, there's going to be a huge crash at some point where people are going to have to be forced to sell houses whatever the price, because they can no longer afford it, because the job market has been crushed, right? If you focus on supply side too much and you only focus on pushing out a lot of houses, right, Eventually, of course, what will happen is a lot of investors and other people will pick it up, but there will be too much houses, and we would have a situation like in 2008. Eventually, a house correction will still have to happen because people bought too many houses, right, that they cannot afford eventually. So correction will happen one way or another. The problem is that we're still focusing on inflation and inflation numbers. However, I told this probably from the first video on to forever that hyperinflation is not just an economic phenomenon. It's actually a social phenomenon. It's when people lose the faith in the currency and the faith of government actually being able to solve their problem, right? So when that faith is lost, the faith in the government being able to solve the problem and the faith in currency, then we have hyperinflation. And it's not the same animal as high inflation, where in high inflation people are incentivized to buy up a bunch of stuff, try to hold it, hold it against inflation, try to stack on as much debt as possible, because inflation sort of pays it off. And I believe a lot of investors have been doing that, and now I think we'll have a couple of more cycles, and then what will happen only God knows. But if eventually within these 6-month cycles that inflation goes up, then there's quote unquote a solution, which is crushing the job market. Then inflation goes up in a different asset class, and quote unquote we solve it with something else where we slow it down. Eventually, people can only handle so many of these ups and downs. And at that point, they might lose the faith in currency and completely hyperinflate the dollar, right? The issue is now, as you can see, right, when we were talking about inflation early on, it was only being talked about as transitory, whatever. But now nobody believes in that crap, right? Everybody knows that you cannot trust it, and they know about inflation. In this sense, it's in the back of their mind. If we would have gone back 2-3 years ago, inflation would have not been a topic, or, well, I guess in our circles maybe, but the general public would have not been kind of well versed, or at least would have not been talking about inflation at the dinner table. Well, now they are, right? So that means one leg of the faith in government being able to solve the problem has already fallen, right? Because now it's a topic, right? So now if another wave up happens, people will totally react differently, not the way how they reacted when they bought the idea of transitory, right? They know now what to do, right? And that is another problem, right? With the next leg up, right, people will react completely differently. So the other thing that I have to mention here is that you can play around with supply and demand side economics as much as you can, right? But at some point you will hit one good that is inelastic. That means that you cannot cut back on, right? At some point you will hit the inflation curve, the inflation wave will hit a good type or good category, such as food, that you cannot cut back on, right? And at that point you can play with demand side all you can want. People will still have to eat, right? They will have to cut back on steak and eat ground meat, or I guess you can push ground up whatever crickets or whatever the idiots are pushing now. So at some point you will hit a wall on the demand side economics, and things will break. At that point, we're gonna feel it. I think we're getting there. Unfortunately, we're getting there. I'm not saying we're there now, and I do think a lot of YouTubers kind of oversimplify it, right? Or maybe to scare you into prepping. I guess if that's what they're doing, that's probably more noble than just to scare you for views. But I think eventually we're getting there. I think this summer has taught us a lot about food and the supply chain and how bad it is with all the whole Ukrainian situation affecting, grain prices in Africa. It's gonna be bad if we continue this path, and there's no sign of stopping for now. So yeah, I think in the next 6 months we'll have our definite answer. But in the meantime, you better focus on food security, right? You better focus on at least the minimum stuff, right? And this is not completely new. So we have seen this again and again, especially in totalitarian dictatorships. If you go back to Stalin or whoever was the genius who said that you can crush the bourgeoisie between the between high inflation and high taxes, right? The thing is that, are you really crushing the bourgeoisie right now, or just the middle class mom and dad who has maybe one or two cars and is trying to get by with their job to pay their high credit card debt? Is that really the bourgeoisie? You let the billionaire class tell you who the bourgeoisie is. That's the problem here, is that it's like it's coming back, but it's coming back as a farce. It's becoming totally idiotic, and people still buy it somehow. It's being sold to you as a idiot as an idea that you're saving the planet, or some other thing is where you're okay, you're gonna be eating crickets because you're saving the planet. The truth of the matter is that you're gonna be eating crickets because that's the only thing you will be able to afford. Because for some reason, some billionaire class thought that you were the bourgeoisie that needs to be crushed. So I ask you to reevaluate your positions and unmarry old ideologies, and see the things as they are, as they present themselves to you, and put a little logic. Divorce yourself from old ideologies and be open-minded and see what is unfolding in front of your eyes. Until next time, thank you.